Western Cape Judge President Hlophe is challenging the Judicial Service Commission's decision, which recommended that President Ramaphosa suspend him. The JSC found Hlophe guilty of misconduct for attempting to influence other judges in cases that were pending before the Constitutional Court. This included the case involving former President Jacob Zuma and French arms manufacturer Thales. Joining us now to take a look at how this has played itself out, we're joined by Mbekezeli Benjamin, Research and Advocacy Officer at Judges Matter. Thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. Just maybe for the purpose of the entire conversation, let's start with the history of this case. Just give us a reminder of what it's all about.
Well, good afternoon to the viewers. The history is quite long and it's quite complicated. It spans about 14 years. This is the 14th year of the saga. So I will not go into too much detail. But basically, like you said earlier, Judge Hlophe was accused by justices of the Constitutional Court of trying to improperly influence them, at least two of them, in cases that were pending before the Constitutional Court. That was in 2008. And then over the subsequent years, the JSC has been trying to deal with this case through a number of different ways. So in 2009, the JSC tried to do an inquiry with all the justices, and they ultimately found that no one was guilty of misconduct, and they basically let everyone go. This was taken on review in the High Court by Freedom Under Law, and the court said, no, the JSC has to do a proper investigation, including the cross-examination of witnesses. And we saw this happen in 2020. There was a tribunal where witnesses were cross-examined, and then ultimately that tribunal said that Judge Hlophe was guilty of misconduct, and that decision was confirmed by the JSC in 2021. Now, what has happened since then is Judge Hlophe has gone to the High Court to try and reverse that JSC decision that found him guilty. He said that it was unlawful and improper for the JSC to find him guilty of gross misconduct, and he wants that decision to be set aside. Now, that High Court decision was unfortunately dismissed in the High Court, and the JSC then, in a couple of weeks after that High Court decision, they then put him on suspension, which is where we are now, and he is challenging that decision to suspend him.
Like you said, very complicated with so many allegations and counter-allegations. Then in enters a judicial misconduct system which was introduced in 2010. How should we understand that?
So that's another, I think, complication in all of this. There wasn't, at the time when this complaint was first laid, there wasn't really a misconduct system to speak of. And in about 2010, the law was changed, and a new misconduct system was put in place, and this Hlophe complaint was then dealt with according to that misconduct system. It was subject to some legal challenges over the past 10 years or so, but ultimately it then led to him being found guilty of gross misconduct, and now the recommendation of suspension. But what we as Judges Matter are concerned about is that this system is far too complex to be effective. It's not working because at every point there's so many decisions that need to be made that all of those decisions can be challenged in court, which causes really a point of just malfunction and complete dysfunction, as we are seeing now. The progress that is being made on this complaint is so slow simply because there's just too many loopholes that can be challenged in court, and that cause a lot of delay.
Let's expand on some of those loopholes. You say the system is not working. What have you picked up, especially when it comes to sitting judges who then have to deal with such matters?
So that is another complication of the system, that only sitting judges decide judicial misconduct complaints. So that means judges who are currently battling with a high workload in the High Courts and in the Supreme Court of Appeal now have an additional workload to deal with misconduct complaints that are filed with the Judicial Conduct Committee. So that is also unworkable, because what you often find is that these sitting judges are far too busy with their day-to-day court work that they hardly have time to deal with these misconduct cases. So that's why it takes so long for some of them to be dealt with. So what we recommend as Judges Matter is that retired judges should actually be brought in to deal with this misconduct, with these misconduct cases, simply because the retired judges have more time on their hands to deal with the cases, but they also have been in the system and they know how the system works. So they are best placed to discipline other judges because they are the elders of the system. So that's also something that we think should be included in the reforms to the judicial misconduct system.
So what about this? We understand there's no dedicated administrative staff available to receive and process complaints. Rather curious.
Yes, this is also a curious factor in all of this, because if you look at other countries like the UK, New Zealand, Kenya, and many other countries in the world, there is a dedicated system with dedicated staff who are able to process complaints as quickly as they come. And in South Africa, we don't have that. Unfortunately, the JSC staff, sadly, they are really inundated with work that has to do with judicial appointments. There will be interviews in October. They are dealing with those. And then at the same time, they have to deal with misconduct complaints. That also causes these delays that we're seeing because they just are overburdened and they don't have the time to deal with these cases effectively. So that's another proposal that we're putting forward, that there should be dedicated staff with dedicated resources who can be able to deal with the cases as quickly as possible.
What then do we know about similar cases, right, like that of Justice Hlophe? Do we know if there's, other judges who find themselves in a similar situation? And what does that then tell us?
So I must emphasize here, Dudu, that the vast majority of cases of misconduct against judges are actually unmeritorious. They are literally just people who are disgruntled by court decisions, who feel that they can't take them on appeal or on review, so they file complaints against judges as sort of a way to get the sort of a revenge against the judges for deciding against them. So that is the vast majority of cases, I must emphasize. But there are those cases that have to deal with serious misconduct. And those cases are the ones that are investigated by the Judicial Conduct Committee. We saw recently Judge Krikla was found guilty of misconduct. Chief Justice Mogoeng was also found guilty of misconduct in the past. So those kinds of cases are the kinds that are considered a little bit more serious and require more investigation. And what we've seen in the system is that even those cases, it is too slow to deal with them simply because of the problems that I spoke about, the judges who are sitting in courts and also sitting in misconduct cases, and also the lack of administrative staff to deal with the cases effectively.
So you've cited countries where things actually, or the system actually works just fine. Kenya, for instance, the UK. So what is it about South Africa that we're not able to get a handle on this? Who's not paying attention?
So there are multiple role players who are to blame for this, and I think they should be looking at this with much closer attention than they have. The first one is Parliament. Parliament hasn't reviewed this system for about 10 years. So we think that it's time for Parliament to relook at the system and redesign the system to make it more streamlined and much more effective than it currently is. The second role player is the JSC itself. We think that they should be given more resources to deal with the cases. They should hire more staff. They should start dealing with these cases electronically. There's no reason why it should still be a paper-based system. Because in New Zealand, for example, things work almost digitally. You file a complaint, it is dealt with as quickly as possible using digital means. So this is not impossible in South Africa. I think it just needs focus from Parliament, from the Department of Justice and the Ministry of Justice rather, and from the JSC itself in terms of focusing the resources and the people in order to make sure that the system works as effectively as possible. And just to emphasize, the reason why this is all important is so that we ensure the integrity of the judiciary is never beyond question. We don't want a situation where we have questions or doubts about the honesty and the integrity of the judges who sit in our courts.
Absolutely. Mbekezeli Benjamin is with Judges Matter. Thank